Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the 7th round for the FIDE Canada's chess tournament being held here in Toronto, Canada. Now, yesterday I drew my 6th round after playing with double blacks, and today this is the final round for the first half of the tournament. We're at round number 7. There are 14 rounds total, so after this we've reached the halfway mark. Now, obviously, I'm finally getting to play with the white pieces, and I'm playing against one player remaining who I've not faced off against yet, which of course is Jan Nepomniachtchi, the winner of the last two candidates tournaments, a player who played for the World Championship against both Magnus Carlsen and Ding Laurent. Now, in this match, I have the white pieces against him, which is, of course, I want to try and get as much play as I can. All right, without further ado, let's jump right into the action. So I start by playing e4. Jan plays e5, knight to f3, and now we get knight f6. Now, Jan has been playing this Petrov defense for a long time, pretty much ever since the match against Magnus Carlsen, I believe in 2021. It's become the staple of his opening repertoire, and it's very, very steady opening. He has not lost many games with it, and it's really, really helped him to be very, very competitive in all of these matches. So, after knight to f6, I take on e5, we get d6, knight f3, takes, d4, d5, and I play bishop d3. Now, you guys might remember that the 2022 candidates held in Madrid, Spain. I also played against Jan with the white pieces in a famed Petrov game. In that one, we had this line with bishop to e7 being played, but today, Jan plays bishop d6. So here I castle, he castles, I go c4, c6, rook to e1, trying to pressure the knight on e4, and now he plays this move, bishop to f5, guarding the knight on e4. The game continues with queen b3, trying to pressure both the pawns on d5 as well as the pawn on b7, and now Jan plays queen d7. Here I go c5, bishop c7, and now I play this move g3. Now, one of the drawbacks of playing a system like the Petrov in every single game with black is that your opponent knows what's coming and they can prepare a lot of pet lines for the opening. But for a player like Jan, or anybody, frankly, who takes up the Petrov defense, it's very, very solid. So as long as you remember the best moves, you will always be in the game, even if you get surprised, because it's such a fundamentally sound opening. Now, G3 is actually a system I prepared back in 2022 for the candidates. I wanted to use it against Nepo back then, but of course, in that game, he did not play bishop to d6. He put his bishop on the e7 square. So, I finally get to use it now. Of course, I had looked at this line during my training camp. It's not something that I looked at 2 years ago and then just decided to pull it up off the shelf for this event. It's something that I have looked at quite a bit in recent times during my training camp to get ready for this event. Obviously, in an event like the Candidates, there are many players who can play openings like the Petrov, so you generally do specific preparation for an opening as opposed to a player. So I played g3, and now Jan plays this move a5. Now, black has a couple of different options here in terms of what he can play. a5 is not the only one, but it is considered to be quite reasonable. So here I go knight b to d2, pressuring the knight on e4. Also worth pointing out that when I go g3, if I were to take right away on b7, I lose the game to the classic fossil with bishop takes h2, checking the king, and then I lose my queen and the game. So when I go g3, one of the ideas here is that I try to blunt the power of this dark square b on the diagonal, and I threaten to capture the pawn. So, Jan goes a5, and now I play knight b d2. Worth pointing out that if I take on b7 right away here, black can play the amazing move knight to a6, sacking a horse, but protecting the rook on a8. If I take the knight here in this position, there's rook to b8, and now after knight to e5 here, I attack his queen. My queen's under attack, and after takes, black should be a little bit better here in this endgame because I have these weaknesses on both b2 and c5. And eventually down the road, if I say protect the pawn, black now has a little bit more control in the center with these two pawns to push up the board. So I go knight b d2. Jan plays bishop to e6, a move that's trying to remove the bishop from the diagonal. Now if I take the knight, spaghetti. I lose some material here because the bishop is hitting my queen on the b3 square. So I can't take the knight. So what do? Of course, now I go for this pawn on b7 because there are no longer any fossils on the diagonal. But, as you guys probably can tell, this was straightforward preparations and not anything super special. So even though I'm explaining the moves, both of us were still very well prepared at this point in the game. So, Jan sacks the horse with knight takes f2, and now I play this move, bishop takes h7. If I were to take the horse, once again, I lose to the fossil as bishop takes pawn is check, and then I lose the queen on b7. So here I play bishop takes h7, he takes, and now I gobble the rook on the a8 square. Now again, this is all preparation. I was well within what I had studied before the game, so there are no surprises thus far. Jan goes knight to h3 check. I play king g2, and now he plays the move bishop g4. I go queen b7, and he plays the move rook e8. Now, keep in mind that the analysis we're doing right now is with a fairly weak chess.com engine. It's based on a local computer. Obviously, I'm here in Toronto using my laptop, so the evaluations are going to be a little bit sketchy at best. So I played queen b3 here. We get the trade. One line that Jan showed that was actually kind of cool here was in this position after rook to e8. I think one of the lines was, how did this line go? There was some line where black had sacked the queen that he showed in the game. I'm trying to remember how it went. I don't remember right off, but I think it was something like, it wasn't knight e5. I'm trying to remember how the line goes. Let me think for 1 second, you guys. I try to recall, because there was some really cool line that he showed after the game that I just can't remember for the life of me. Maybe it was, what was it? I can't remember. Sorry, you guys. I'm trying to recall. If you want to see with the line that Jan showed after the game, there is a press conference we did for the FIDE broadcast where he showed a cool queen sack that would have been completely fine and led to a forced draw. At any rate, I don't remember it, so let's continue with the game. So here I play queen to b3, and now he trades the rooks and plays queen e6, and I play the move queen to d3, checking the king on h7. Jan decides to play the move bishop f5 after a bit of think. Now, one thing that happens when players do a lot of really deep preparation is that if you don't remember the exact line or you haven't looked at it right before the game, in many cases, you sort of can recall what the moves are or what the right move is, but if you can't remember the follow-up, then sometimes you change your mind at the board. So Jan played the move bishop f5 here. King to g8 leads to a forced draw in this position if Jan had played it, but again, without him having looked at it right before the game, he very naturally chooses not to play it because the line that leads to a forced draw here is simply not very obvious. After knight to f3, one of the lines that leads to a draw is knight to d7, knight to f1 here, and now white's trying to bring out the bishop or move the knight to g5, and after knight to f6, knight g5, queen to e1, the game ends in a draw after black sacks a horse and goes knight to e4. White's best move here is knight to g1, and after queen f2, king h1, black can either go back to f5 or to e1. Both of these moves lead to a forced draw, as white has nothing better here than moving the king to g2 to dodge the classic knight to f2, which would fork the king and the queen. So this is a very, very deep line that leads to a forced draw. It's something that I had seen before the game, but I was banking on the fact that Jan, having probably not looked at this exact line right before the game, would probably not remember. And sure enough, he chooses instead to play bishop to f5. Now, keep in mind, none of this has been played, of course, but players with the strong supercomputers do analyze lines very, very deeply in the modern times. So we get bishop f5. Now I go queen to f1 here, and now Jan plays knight d7. Now this, of course, also very logical, because in the other variation here, you'll notice that white can move the knight to f1 and try to bring the bishop into the game right away, whereas now after queen to f1 and knight d7, if I put this knight on f3 here, you'll notice that the other knight is stuck here. Like, even if I go, actually, sorry, I mean this knight here, I can't put this knight on f1, and just conceptually, if we put a position like this, how do I get the bishop in the game? I can't move the knight to f1. If I go to b3, black plays a4, forcing the knight backwards. So with this queen on f1 here, this knight does not have the retreating square to f1 available. So, after knight d7, I now play the move knight ef3. Now, keep in mind, I had also looked at this position before the game. The only move that I had looked at in depth here was bishop to d8, which is the top sesame move. The supercomputers actually like this move, even though on the weak chess.com engine, it's not one of the top 3 moves. And after bishop to d8, the move that I had looked at was knight to d3 here, knight d7, queen e1, queen g6, and now the move knight to f2. And white is probably very, very slightly better, but the game goes on. So, when Jan plays knight d7, I have to take stock of the position. First of all, I'm up an hour on the clock, which is very, very good. But secondarily, knowing that bishop d8 is the best computer move, I have to start thinking to myself, if bishop d8 is the best move and the reply is to put the knight on d3, why is knight d7 not the best computer move? So in a sense, I'm trying to think about, like, what if I were Stockfish, or I'm playing at Stockfish? Why does Stockfish put the knight here, put the bishop here, versus putting the knight here? So in my mind, the way that I rationalized this was that if black plays bishop to d8, if I go knight to ef3 here, I thought that maybe black has a move like knight to f4, checking the king, because the bishop covers the g5 square from white forking the king and the queen. So, in my mind, once I work it through, and this is what I conclude, then I think after knight d7, well, here I probably should put the knight on f3, because now black can't go knight to f4, because after takes, checking king f2, when black wins my queen, I have knight g5, forking the king and the queen, and winning the game. So, logically, in my mind, knowing that bishop d8 is the top move and he plays knight d7, it makes sense to bring the knight back to f3, because the bishop here does not cover the g5 square. Jan plays the move knight to f6, and now I play this move knight to g1. Now, one of the reasons I played knight g1 here is that black currently is down a rook and a pawn for a bishop, but my rook and my bishop are simply not in the game. Both these pieces are out to lunch. They have not moved yet. We're on move number 24 already, and when you don't develop your pieces, bad things happen. Just ask myself. My game against Vita, I did the same thing. I never developed my rook on a1, and I lost the game because of it. So, I do have the rook and the pawn for the bishop here, but I need to try and relieve some of the pressure as these pieces for black are all aiming towards my king side here. So in this position, I play knight to g1, and now king g8 is played here by Jan. Probably not the top move. Computer preferred knight to e4 right away, but he plays the move king g8. Now, this move also is very logical here because he wants to dodge any tricks with the knight f3, knight g5 idea, forking the king and the queen. So after king g8, I played this move queen to e2, and this is a move that I was very unhappy with myself as soon as I played it, because I felt that of the two plans I had here, that knight df3 was simply a better choice. According to the supercomputer sets, that this was the top line. But after knight to e4 and a4, I think it's still very, very complex. Having spoken to one of my trainers who's on site here with me, he said that even according to the supercomputer, white has a very, very tiny advantage. It's not anything conclusive. So even though you see the eval bar with the weakchess.com engine saying that white is much better, it's probably still very close to equal. So after king to g8, I play this move queen e2, and the reason that things start to go astray is because as soon as knight e4 is played here, you'll notice that in this position, as soon as Jan played king g8, or I should say, in this moment when Jan was using his time, I told myself that here I've got an hour 30 on the clock. Use your time. We're already at move number 25 in the game. There's plenty of time. Time pressure will never be an issue, so make sure you try to use a lot of time on every single move. So after king g8 happens, I play queen e2 after, like, I think a 5-minute think, and this already is going in the wrong direction. And as soon as Jan plays the move knight to e4, I became very upset with myself because I realized that after knight to f3, knight e4 and a4, not realized, but in my mind at least, I thought that I had a big advantage in this position. So when I go queen to e2 here, and we get knight to e4 being played, I spent a lot of time here. I spent 40 minutes before blundering with this move a4. Now, most of my time here was spent, first of all, about 10 to 20 minutes was just being angry at myself for playing queen e2 quickly, rather than considering knight f3 and a4 like I had thought about prior to him playing king g8, I think it was, or maybe it was right after he did it. But then secondly, I was also very upset because I spent a lot of time calculating this line with takes here, and I thought that after bishop g4, queen to e3, and knight takes c5, there wasn't that big of an advantage. Now, it's funny because actually the engine that I'm using on my computer, you'll see from the bar, it gives white a small advantage, but it's not actually saying this is all that great for white. So this kind of makes me feel better because I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what was happening in these lines. And I'll show you guys all of my analysis that I considered. So one line that I want to do is trade here and play knight to b3 to guard the pawn on d4. Actually, before we get here, I'll point out one other important note. If black were to do this right away after takes here, I have knight to f3 guarding the pawn on d4, and I'm simply much better. That's why black does throw in this bishop g4 little tickle first, because now when we get this position here, the bishop stops me from being able to put the knight on f3 to guard the pawn on d4. So one line that I looked at was knight b3, a4, knight c5, but after takes and bishop to e5, I have a serious issue here with the rook and the bishop in the corner, because if I try to move my bishop away to, say, d2, after a3 here, black is actually probably winning the game, because when I move the rook, he takes and goes bishop to f5, followed by queening the pawn. And if I play a3 here, for example, black can probably play something like bishop to f5 here, and I'm really struggling to activate the rook and the bishop. If I move my bishop after takes, rook f1 and g6, I probably can still draw the game, but if anybody's better here, I think it probably is black, with the weak pawn on a3, and black also being able to push either the d or the a pawns up the board. So I was unhappy with this line, so then let's move on to line number 2. So the next line that I was considering after knight c5 is to play this move knight to b3, and after knight to e4, I thought about playing knight c5 here, but after takes and bishop to e5, I didn't think I was better. One sample line is bishop to d2 here, where after d4, queen d3, and bishop to f5, let's say I go queen b3 and queen d7, black is going to be pushing d3 here if I play rook e1, and he gets like bishop f6 even. I'm still not sure how much better white is. Even bishop to e6 is playable, and the two b's here are probably more than enough compensation for the rook, and black is very much in the game. So I wasn't very happy with this option either. Now, the last option, which I also did consider, was bishop to d2 here. But after f5, it starts to get very scary here. Because if I try to take this pawn on a5, black can sack a pawn with f4. And after takes, queen g6, suddenly my king is very naked here. Black has this great bash and this huge horse on e4. And after king h1 and bishop to h3, if I go rook g1, I guess this is only a draw after knight f2 and queen e4. But this is one line where black is actually drawing very easily. And even if black doesn't have that, philosophically, when I look at this position here, all the way back here, this knight on e4 is such a jumbo pony. And if I try to get rid of it with knight c5, queen g6, and knight e4, de4, black is again pushing pawns in the center of the board. And it's just not clear whether I'm actually better here. Now, one thing that's actually very hard to judge about this, and one of the reasons I'm not perhaps super happy, is that after the game, there was a press conference between myself and Jan, and in that press conference, he mentioned a variation that he was considering. I don't know if he would have played it, because obviously at the board, he would have thought longer and everything would be different, but one of the lines that he mentioned that he thought he would play was this line with f5, but here, after takes, bishop f4, bishop d8, and let's just say h4, white is much better here. Black can't push the pawn to g5, and white is doing quite well. So this was one line that Jan mentioned. Again, I don't know, maybe with a supercomputer, we'll say even this is not that clear for white, but it's very, very hard to judge. But that being said, this was the last line that I considered here, this bishop d2. But after f5, I just thought he's got this huge horse on f5, or e4. If I try to trade off, he's probably his compensation, and so I simply wasn't happy. So then once I run through those thought processes, or the thought process during the game, I start thinking, what other options do I have? What we call candidate moves, pun unintended, where you look at multiple options of moves that you can play. So after I'm unhappy with this knight h3, another line that I consider was knight df3 here, but this is part of why I was so upset, because if I go knight df3, I'm thinking to myself that after, let's just say, takes and bishop g4, for example, maybe here I can go a4, but it's very, very unclear what's happening after knight g5, for example, after takes, king here, and let's just say takes, h3, actually not king g, sorry, king f2. King f2 takes an h3 here with knight d4, takes knight b3, rook to b1, and knight takes c5. Now after b3 and king f7, white maybe is a little bit better here, but black is going to be pushing these pawns up where I think e5 is actually quite a bit better, and I'm not really sure whether I'm much better or whether black is completely fine. So once I realized this, now I'm thinking to myself, well, you stupid idiot, why did you play queen e2 in the first place? So if I played knight to f3, knight e4, and a4 here, the queen is not on e2. So the ideas with bishop g4 have zero effect. There is simply no pin on the board, and I aim to bring the rook to a3 and e3 right away with the classic rooklet. So once I see this, I start getting really, really unhappy with myself, because again, I'm thinking to myself, why didn't I just go knight f3 with the queen on f1? Because that now, this idea of bishop g4 would be ineffective, because I could go a4 and rook a3 if the queen were not on the square. So once I run through that calculation, then I'm unhappy, and I start thinking, well, maybe I can just go a4 and rook a3 right away. Now, a4 is a horrible move here. It does not actually lose the game, fortunately, but the reason it's so horrible is because I simply miss the next move that Jan played here, which is that Jan plays a brilliant move. Bishop takes pawn on g3. Now, this move is brilliant because if I try to take, well, I guess I took back in the game, but if I try to trade on e4 after takes, king g3 and knight g1, queen to h5 is one sample line. Black has a beautiful move here, bishop to f3, winning on the spot, because now the queen is under attack. I also struggle to guard the h3 square, and if I play queen h4, queen e1, I get skewered from behind, and I lose the queen on h4 in the game. And if I play, say, queen e5 after check here, check and king e1, there's the beautiful move bishop to e2 here, followed by knight to f3 checkmate, or queen f1 and queen d1 as well, and black is simply going to win very, very soon. So, like, as soon as I see this, or actually I shouldn't say this, as soon as I played a4, I got it from the board, walked away to this private area behind where you can have coffee and desserts and everything else, and to my horror, I suddenly thought, uh-oh, there's bishop takes g3. Now, Jan did not play bishop g3 right away. He actually used about 12 minutes. But during those entire 12 minutes, I was saying, what have you just done? You spent 40 minutes, and you blundered such an obvious tactic. And then, of course, Jan takes the pawn. So I'm very unhappy, but luckily here in this position, I have only a couple of moves, or only one move that does not lose the game immediately, which is to take the bishop. Now Jan sacks a horse with knight f4 to fork the king and the queen. I take the horse, he checks, and now I have to go king to f1. If I go king f3, queen g3 is mate. If I go to h1, knight g3 is winning because of the classic right triangle with queen h5, checking the king and winning the knight on e2. So I go king f1, knight g3, king e1, he takes, I take back, and now we have a weird material imbalance where I have a rook and 2 knights for the queen, but luckily the pawns are the same. We both have 5 pawns here, and because of that, I'm actually able to save the game. Jan plays bishop g4, I go rook to a3, and now he decides to take the knight on e2. Now, Jan could have played queen c2 here, but after knight to f3, my knights and my rooks are really well placed. The rook guards the knight guards the bishop, and I think that it's still completely fine for white. So Jan decides to take the knight on e2. I take back. He goes queen g1. And now the game ends in a draw after this knight b3 move. One line that we considered after the game in our press conference was check, king d3, check, king c2, and queen f4. But this actually gets very, very dangerous for black after rook to d3 here. Because if black goes g5, there's knight to f3 here. Rook guards knight, and I win this pawn. No check on h2 either. And if black plays a move like queen to f2, now I can go b4, takes an a5, and suddenly I'm pushing p on the queen side. Computer thinks it's fine for black, but there's simply no reason to go for this because if anybody is going to be better, it will be white with this passed a pawn. So that's why Jan plays queen g1. I go knight to b3 here, guarding the bishop on c1, pawn on d4, and hitting the pawn on a5 at the same time. And the game concludes in a draw after queen g2, king d1, queen f3, king c2, queen e4, king c3, check, king c2, and we have a repetition. And on move 40, we agree to a draw. Now, you'll notice one funny thing about this game, which is that my bishop on c1 simply never moved. Neither did my pawn on b2, but the bishop on c1 did not have to do any work today as it simply stayed on c1 and enjoyed the show from start to finish. Jan, of course, did have to force a draw here, though, because if he were to get careless and play queen g2, for example, after king to b1, I hide the king on a2, and now this is probably close to winning because after f6 takes knight b3, queen c4, and a5, I have a rook behind a passed pawn, which I'm pushing up the board very quickly, and black is going to lose the game as he cannot create a pass pawn on the king side. So Jan forces a draw, move 40 with queen to e4. Game does end peacefully for both of us. A very strange game because on the one hand, I feel like I had some opportunities. I know a computer said it was probably completely fine the whole way through according to supercomputers, but there was definitely room for error from Jan if he was not super precise. And unfortunately, we'll never know because I didn't find the best move. So I'm a little bit disappointed to have drawn the game today, or have drawn in the fashion I did, because I don't feel like I put the maximum pressure on Jan. But nonetheless, a draw is a reasonable result, especially considering that I simply missed this bishop takes g3 tactic, and I was very lucky to not be losing after that. So, end of the day, I end the first half of the tournament on an even score with 3.5 points out of 7. I remain 1 point out of the lead. Today, there was a big shocker with Alireza Firouzja winning against D. Gukesh from India. That means that at the halfway mark, Jan Nepomniachtchi is the sole leader with 4.5 points out of 7. I'm 1 point back, half point back, I believe, are Fabiano Caruana and D. Gukesh, who lost today. So it's going to be a very, very exciting finish to the event, certainly. If I can pick up a game here or there, I can just play well. I will have my chances. But so far, it is what it is, and we just have to wait and see what happens. Now, tomorrow is a rest day. There will be no games, but on Saturday, I will be playing the 8th round with white pieces, a double white, playing against Fabiano Caruana, my countryman from the United States. Should be an exciting game. Looking forward to that matchup. I will obviously be back to do a recap after that game, but for now, I'm going to go eat some dinner here in Toronto. Then I'm going to probably go rest, study some, enjoy the day tomorrow, and then come back fresh for round number 8. So, at any rate, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you're not already subscribed to my channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with a recap after the 8th round of the FIDE Canada's chess tournament being held here in Toronto, Canada. See you guys. Bye.